as a start, we are Will, Manuela, and I'm Daniel. We're all part of the Cambridge MedTech Foundation. I would like to give you a quick overview of that. So we're a student-run society at the University of Cambridge that was established around 3 years ago. And we're affiliated with a national network called the MedTech Foundation that is located all across the UK. And that network is affiliated with the NAHR Surgical MedTech Cooperative based in Leeds. So where we're coming from, we're basically the engagement and training initiative of the NAHR. Our activities in Cambridge are mainly structured around the innovation program. I will come to that in a second. And we also have fantastic medics talks. I really encourage you to check out our website and our Facebook. We do have fantastic medics talks upcoming in the future. So make sure you check our Facebook so you don't miss any of those. And we will have fantastic speakers telling you all kinds of things about interesting projects in MedTech. So our national network, we are part of this MedTech Foundation and we exist all over the UK. So even if you're not from Cambridge, you can sign up at medtechfoundation.org. There is also a link to our membership form. You can sign up there. You will receive important and fascinating announcements about conferences in MedTech and just all kinds of things across the UK. And your local spoke might be able to connect with you as well if you're at this place. In Cambridge, as I said, we are running an innovation program, which is essentially an educational program where we introduce you to medical device development. I know some of you are on the call today as well, some of the people who just completed the innovation program. We do have fantastic workshops, we have interesting clinical projects to work on, and we do provide you with technical, business, and clinical mentoring. And our partners include MedTech consultancies. We have partners from our local hospital, Addenbrooke's, and we're also working with the business school in Cambridge and with a MedTech accelerator called StartCode in here in Cambridge. So we're really trying to introduce you practically how medical devices can be developed and show you everything what is needed to become an innovator in MedTech. If you would like to register interest, we just completed the program and we're very happy if you would like to join us for next year's program. There is a QR code with a link for the next program that's going to start in Michaelmas. So please feel free to sign up there and we will send you all the information once the new program is recruiting. So now we're moving to the Q&A session, which we're all here for. And I would like to introduce you to Manuela and Will, who are part of the Cambridge MedTech Foundation as well. I will hand over to them now for our Q&A session.
Thanks, Dan. And hi, everyone. I'm Manuela. I'm a third-year PhD student in biophysics, for which I'm applying principles from data science to study neurodegenerative diseases. It's our very great pleasure to introduce to all of you Elena Kyria, who is an award-winning headhunter, international speaker, and professional branding coach. She studied modern languages and linguistics at the universities of Granada and Sussex. And from a very young age on, she was interested in entrepreneurship and innovation. So it was not much of a surprise that her first job in recruitment was very entrepreneurial focused. She started off setting up a life science brand within a larger company from scratch, that is to say, which is incredibly impressive in my opinion. In 2015, Elena founded Elemed, which is representing tonight, which is Europe's leading recruitment for jobs in the MedTech sphere, with focus on technical aspects in particular. She has expertise especially in regulatory and quality concerns, which are of prime importance for MedTech, as I'm sure you're all aware of. So I think it becomes increasingly clear that Elena is extremely well positioned to answer all of your questions related to careers in MedTech. And we're very much looking forward to all the insight that she's going to share with us based on your questions tonight. I'm going to hand over to Elena now, and I think the first question that we're going to answer is sort of putting all the discussion of tonight into a bigger picture, sort of targeting some of your questions, which were like, what is MedTech? How would you define it? Why are you interested?
So what is MedTech is a really loaded question, because it is huge. There's an organization called MedTech Europe, which represents the European MedTech industry. And they define it as medical technologies are products, services, or solutions used to save and improve people's lives. And they go across all different therapeutic areas, all different types of technologies. So literally ranging from medical apps to surgical tools to great big machines used for, you know, scanning patients, all the way through to tiny nanotechnology that's really innovative right now, and beyond. So it's huge, and in essence, when we talk about medtech, we talk about medical devices, which are typically kind of the products themselves. We talk about IVDs, in vitro diagnostics, which are the tests. And we also talk about the whole digital health ecosystem, which is kind of all the apps and technology out there that is kind of now moving us more towards this concept of connected health. Medical technologies, like when can it be used? There's like so many different areas, but essentially prevention, right? So if you think about how you go about preventing diseases or infections or investigation, there's a really cool product called PillCam by Medtronic, which is used specifically for capsule endoscopy. So essentially, instead of doing kind of an invasive procedure, the patient swallows a tiny little pill and it shows up on a screen exactly what's going on inside. So you can also see some really cool technology in diagnosis. So right now, COVID is a huge area. So COVID tests, that's an in vitro diagnostic test, which falls under MedTech. And we've worked with some of the clients that have been obviously developing those. Monitoring, so anything around kind of like if you go into a hospital and you're hooked up to a cardiac monitor to see, you know, heart rate and vital signs, all the way through to the really innovative type of monitoring technology through tiny little sensors that will sit on your skin and monitor and send signals to your phone in terms of how your body and your vital signs are performing, or glucose monitoring in that way as well, all the way through to obviously like what everybody thinks, so like treatment and surgeries. Robotics is really big right now, so I could literally go on and on and on, but that is medtech.
Thank you very much for that overview. And I guess one question that I guess is more of a personal note, but that came up from one of the attendees, is why you specifically chose medtech, like what fascinates you?
Yeah, I think for me, what I love about medtech is that it's so broad. So the role that I sit in as CEO of a recruitment company specializing in medtech is that I can see the whole spectrum of what the industry looks like. Similar to you guys at the MedTech Foundation, you get to see all the different types of companies out there, small startups that are really, really innovating and disrupting what is going on, all the way through to the giant big corporates that are really, really well established. So for me, it was to do with the true innovation that we see in medical devices and in vitro diagnostics, that we do see in pharma, but the process of that is much, much slower. The development cycle of that is much, much slower. And in medtech, you know, depending on how the risk classification of your product, you can bring that to market in a much faster capacity and really have an impact. So it's fascinating, and it's also an area that I didn't really know much about until I discovered it and realized, wow, you know, and then you kind of go around realizing that everything is basically a medical device. You know, I was in the hospital recently and I was kind of sitting just simply in a hospital room looking at all the products that were in there and realizing, you know, these are all medical devices, and some of them were even the clients that we work with. So it's really an industry that you can touch. and that you see, especially in this area?
I guess I need to briefly break the flow, actually. I'm sorry, because I realized that I forgot to say at the beginning that despite all of you having submitted questions in advance, if sort of you have a new question that comes up sort of based on the discussion that we're having and the answers that Elena is giving, please feel free to send them in the chat, and we'll try to ask them on the flow. And also at the end, there will be, as Sam mentioned, there will be a stage when it will be more opened up to the audience. But for now, I guess sort of, I guess you, in a sense, because from the understanding that we got, many people attending tonight actually have a medical background. But one of the questions that we got is more concern from people from a different background, such as engineers or science, or business, and more focusing on biological sciences as well. So I'm assuming that the people you're interacting with are probably from various backgrounds themselves, and there is no such thing as a typical career, or is there?
No, I mean, when you think about medtech, the industry is so vast. You have to think about actually, what does that look like from a product perspective? Because everything kind of, the way that companies are built, it's all around bringing a product to market, essentially. And so there are typical career paths within certain types of roles in medtech, but there is no typical career in medtech. There is no typical background specifically for medtech. It really depends on what we call the vertical that you decide to go in. So what department essentially you're going in. Are you going into the engineering department? Are you working in the clinical teams? Regulatory, quality, product management, sales, marketing. There's literally, everything. And then it's kind of, what does the career progression look like within those departments?
And I guess since many, that's very insightful, of course. And I guess since many of the people here are actually still at the stage of being students themselves. So do you have any advice on how to find a medtech company that sort of is looking for skills that one might have, is in like how sort of the opposite of what you probably are doing in your job as a recruiter, more of like start looking from the company side of you, more of like what can an individual do to find a good fit?
So I think the great thing to do to start with is actually to target certain disciplines within that. So I've got one visual. I'm not big on slides, but I've got one visual that I am hoping to share, because I think this will put things into context a little bit more. Can I share my screen?
Yeah, you should be able to.
Okay, let's try that. So that's really small. Hopefully you can see my screen now.
Yes, we can.
It's very, very, very high level, okay? But this is kind of like what a life cycle looks like of a product. And then you have all these different jobs that kind of sit alongside that life cycle. So you have the whole thing around idea discovery and innovation, which is more your kind of like scientific, your research and development, your engineering, your legal. You have your invention and prototype, which I think is very closely aligned with the scheme that you just ran, which was all around understanding what is your case study, what is going to be your regulatory strategy, how you're going to get this product to market, where. So these are kind of like your more regulatory skills and your project management skills. Then as you move more towards kind of like your clinical piece, you have roles that sit around clinical operations, running the clinical trials, medical writing. There's roles in health economics and market access. You get your products approved. And then there's the whole piece, which they call here market release, but it's huge, right? It's how do you develop, manufacture your product? How do you ensure it's of high quality? How do you then distribute it to all the markets? Who's selling it for you? Who is in touch with the hospitals or the end users? What happens when it goes wrong? That's your quality and regulatory. How do we feed that back into the initial phase, and how do we iterate and make it better moving forwards? So I think it's great to just generally get an understanding of what does that life cycle look like, and maybe do a little bit of analysis around like what these different roles look like and what speaks to you. So it doesn't necessarily mean to say you have to have a specific background to work in a specific role type. Truly, you know, I know people that have really interesting engineering degrees, but they're working in regulatory affairs, you know, and they're leveraging their experience and knowledge of engineering and applying it to regulatory affairs. So I think it's great to just start to understand what do these different departments look like and what speaks to me. And then how to go about kind of leveraging that is, you know, have a look at what companies are out there that also speak to you. So have a look at like the top 10 companies, but also have a look at what are the most innovative companies out there and technologies that I find really interesting, and then start to look there, you know, and make some direct applications, reach out, network, do things like this, because medtech is all about networks as well.
That's extremely insightful, I have to say. But I guess a question that at least I often have as well, in terms of like looking for the top 10 companies, I guess that's sort of biasing things slightly towards bigger companies, right?
Yeah.
Who also have been more established. And I'm assuming especially startups, but I might be completely wrong, but especially startups might be focusing on particular steps of the innovation cycle or the innovation process, and maybe bigger companies are sort of covering larger, like a bigger chunk or even everything of the life cycle of product design, product innovation, well, in wrong order. But so when it comes down to deciding and looking forward to, maybe since this is more of a student audience, more in terms of internship than in terms of actually the first job after graduating, what is your, or do you want to comment on sort of getting an internship in a small startup as compared to like one of the big players in the field?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm such a believer in getting an internship, if you can, in a startup over a large corporate company. There are pros and cons to both, but in terms of the value that you'll get from joining a startup and the experience that you get is really second to none. You will be part of a small growing company that is really truly innovating. Because startups typically are the most innovative, even compared to the big companies, because they're so slow moving that, you know, they have maybe small teams that innovate, but it's not, you know, at the same scale as startups. And the other thing is that because startups are small, you typically get to have more responsibility. So even if I look at Elemed, you know, we're still kind of sort of considered a startup, we're still quite small. The intern, you know, that joins us at Elemed, in terms of what that intern does compared to an intern in a large corporate company, is totally different. They have access to looking at finance, interfacing with customers, you know, and it's the same if you join a startup in medtech. You get direct access to the CEO, you get to see what the pitches look like, you get to understand what that whole business case is as well behind not just the product, but actually what the business piece looks like, which is also really important. And all of these skills you're going to be able to leverage and put together and package into a kind of portfolio of experience, is what I like to call it. And then you can apply for a bigger company or for, you know, your first job. So I really think that internship is critical. And yeah, if you can, target the smaller companies. Okay.
That's very good advice. I'm sure. So we actually got a question to that from the live chat. Which is from a medical student asking if you have any advice on how to get involved in or with a medtech company, because it seems that their degree doesn't really allow sufficient time for internships unless taking a year out. So is there like any project work during the university degrees? I guess we from the MedTech Foundation could say. Or what your opinion is on educational programs such as the innovation program that we're running.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. I mean, I think because the thing is, a lot of companies, you know, they always ask for experience. And what a program like yours does is it gives people that kind of experience in a short period of time, that will still give them the skills, understanding and initial knowledge in order to take that to industry. And too often what we have is kind of like people that will approach us that will only have academic experience and no internships, no working experience, no innovation projects like what you're offering. And so those kind of transitions are harder to manage, because companies will always say, okay, but what have you done past the theory? So I definitely think for someone who's limited on time, to look at programs like yours, for sure, get involved, you know, and build some experience there. And I promise you, you will learn so much about yourself and about just how the industry works. And then just immerse yourself in the industry. So these MedX talks, that's great, right? We've got a podcast as well. Mine is a little bit more executive level, but it's really insightful because I have, you know, executives, you know, I had the CEO of GN Hearing, you know, talking about like her whole career, you know, so listening to that and getting more of a sense of also what it entails, because when you eventually go to interview, if you can show that you know what you're talking about, you've already got one foot in the door.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I'm surely going to check out your podcast.
I'll send you the link.
Yes, please do so. And I guess related to that, in terms of sort of getting experience and experience required for a career in medtech, is someone asking about sort of the pros and cons of having a PhD if you want to go into medtech. Yeah.
So I think it depends on the role that you're applying for. So if you think back to those different kind of job types that we spoke about, there are some that will really favor a PhD, right? So if I look right now, medical writing is a big area, and it's a great area to get into with limited experience, because there's a huge demand, right? So medical writing is all about reading literature, doing literature searches, and then putting together a scientific argument about the way a product may work in order to submit to get the product approved, right, at a very, very high level. And so there, typically, they look for PhDs, because the type of arguments that you would be writing, the way that you would be writing, the experience that you would get from your PhD doing that would be very easily cross-transferred. If I look at a role like quality, for example, it's not necessary. So what does that mean? It's a benefit if you have a PhD, but if a company has a choice between somebody that has a PhD and no experience, or somebody that has 1 year of experience but no PhD, they typically will go for the person with the 1 year of experience and no PhD. So, you know, it's this whole concept of trying to sandwich what you're doing with little projects or little things that you can do that will build you this kind of portfolio of experience that I talk about. The other thing as well to consider is that PhDs will always help you later on in your career. So, you know, I've made executive level placements where the fact that this person had a PhD got them that next salary banding, or got them that next level, or allowed them to take that jump from, you know, manager to senior director, and it really gave them the edge. So the PhD will help you definitely later on in your career. So look at that as kind of more of a longer term investment, and don't expect that in your first job it's going to give you the immediate edge, is what I would say.
Okay, that's also, I guess I'm repeating myself, also very insightful. But I guess a follow-up question for that, which again is from the live chat, is, I guess you said that there's sort of those hard skills which I guess a PhD, for instance, can help you solidify, assuming that you've done an undergraduate degree in a related area before, or it can complement that depending on like what you're choosing. But that's not the only thing that companies are looking for when recruiting, and also with respect to soft skills, but not exclusively. So what are the skills that especially startups are looking for, that one should be able to demonstrate?
From a soft skill perspective?
Pardon?
From a soft skill perspective?
Yes, I think that was, yeah. Well, not only, I guess, I just read the question, but soft skills included.
Yeah, so this is a really, really good question. The one thing, whenever I'm recruiting for a startup, that absolute one thing that they always talk about is hands-on, right? So the ability to be a sponge and to like just jump in and learn as you go is critical to survival in a startup, essentially, because there's always challenges coming up, and you don't know, you don't know what you don't know until you've got a challenge in front of you and you have to deal with it. So that kind of ability, that kind of fearlessness or willingness to be a sponge, or to be comfortable in uncomfortable situations, this is what startups absolutely love. Curiosity, ability to ask questions, a fast learner is also something that's really important, and somebody who is able to recognize their strengths and their weaknesses, and then work on their weaknesses and play to their strengths. So these are some of the key soft skills that we see with all the startups. And I've literally just recorded a podcast with a really cool company that we're recruiting for called Neuro Brain Therapeutics. I'll send you the link. And she was speaking specifically on this topic. And this was the CEO of the company, who has a background in corporate, so Medtronic, which is, really big global player, now to a tiny little startup, and talking about the differences and what you really need to have in order to be successful.
I guess so. That is again a follow-up question from the live audience, which sort of nicely fits into here. I think is, I guess, being innovative in what form whatsoever, whether in a big company, in a startup, or even if one is considering founding their own company, it is sort of, problems are going to arrive, and the difficulty is going to push through. If you have any advice on what one can do to keep powering through when things are getting hard.
So the thing that you'll find about startups, or joining a startup, or being a founder, is that you typically will have this very strong sense of purpose, right? And if it's your company or your product, that will literally, keep you going through. But if you're joining a company, the question is really try to understand, what is your purpose in that company? What is the thing that is getting you out of bed in the morning, and what are you aiming for, and what is the impact of what you're doing truly? And really keeping sight of that purpose is what will drive you, because we all have bad days, and we all have challenges and difficult situations to deal with, but really understanding what it's all for and what you're driving towards will help you see the big picture, as opposed to, the small kind of bump in the road along the way.
Yeah, I fully agree. But I think one difficulty that people might be focusing or struggling with, especially at university, sort of when career paths aren't fully, surely not developed yet, but maybe not even laid out. So when you're still looking for what you actually want to do, when you're still looking for finding your purpose, do you have any advice on how one can sort of add that finding, or foster or facilitate finding what one really wants to do and what one really wants to enjoy, especially as a university student?
I think I really think, first of all, immersing yourself in the industry. So trying to actually understand what is it? Is medtech something that you want to do? So, and if so, are there specific technologies that interest you, or is it specific role types, that interest you, and why, and what's the benefit? And, so some people I know, they're absolutely, obsessed by kind of the brain, right? And so that's somewhere where they kind of go really, really deep. And then after you've kind of got a sense of what's going on, really try as much as you can, try out as much, attend free webinars, do, the things that you're doing in the MedTech Foundation to try to get some working experience, or just to get a taste of what that's about. Connect with people on LinkedIn. Have coffees with people, that's a great tip that virtual coffees, hey, I noticed that you're working in clinical in this company, and this is an area I really am thinking about pursuing in my career, but I'd love to learn more about it. What you change and what you love about it. Would you be open to a chat? And a lot of people would say yes to that if you approach it in the right way. So I think kind of going past just internet research and trying to speak to people and get a feel into the industry as much as possible. Network, join networking hubs, and attend as many virtual or in-person after COVID conferences or seminars as possible, just to get a sense of like what it actually looks like. That's what I would say.
Yeah, no, I agree. I guess post-COVID, well, I'm not sure that's going to be easier or harder, because I guess we probably are spending more time online at the moment. So it might be easier to reach out to people who might not be located at the same physical place. So maybe that's actually a really good environment or a good opportunity in that sense. I'm realizing now that I've really enjoyed that conversation. But actually quite a lot of time has passed already. So yeah. I'm going to hand over to Will, because we still have a few questions which were highly rated from sort of the pre-event submission, more focusing specific on medicine and early careers. And before we're opening it up to the floor.
Yeah, right. Thanks, Manuela. Yes, well, sorry to interrupt. It's maybe a bit late in the day to be introducing myself, but hi everyone, I'm Will. I'm a medical and PhD student in my 4th year in Cambridge, and I'm calculated with a degree in engineering as well. So I might start by looking after some of my own here by asking some of the questions that were asked by a few of the medics. So I think a very common theme was people asking about how exactly they can combine a career in medtech or any involvement in medtech with their clinical practice, and whether you have any examples or any experience of working with clinicians, how they've managed to do that.
So definitely, when medical device companies are running their clinical trial, they're partnering with hospitals in order to do that. So from that perspective, there's an opportunity to get more involved, and typically there, you'll get a chance to go deeper into your clinical area of expertise. So there's opportunities there to get really involved in up and coming technology, and that's when you're kind of already working as a clinician. Alternatively, if there's an interest to potentially do something on the side, there are positions. So without going too technical, there are opportunities for clinical review to take place of documentation by manufacturers, and it's absolutely essential and critical in order for them to get their products approved to actually be able to be sold. And so typically what they look for are clinicians that are actually actively working in hospitals, or have a deep clinical knowledge of a certain therapeutic area or a certain disease or certain type of technology that they're working with, in order to review the documentation to actually assess if the product will work in a clinical setting. And so there's some kind of consultancy type work which would involve, alongside what you're already doing, reviewing this type of document, giving your clinical opinion, and basically signing that, off as, a clinical professional. That's something that you can supplement alongside. And not a lot of people know that there's a demand for that, but there is. So that's something that you could look at. And then ultimately, medical doctors that switch to industry are really hard to find. So people that have worked in a clinical setting, maybe a medical doctor by background, but then actually decide they want to move purely into industry, into a medical affairs role or a clinical department, those type of people are really, really hard to find. They're few and far between. So there's also the opportunity to leverage your working experience from a clinical context into industry, into roles that are, if you have a look for medical affairs, those are the ones that I would recommend, and product safety as well.
Great, well, thank you. So it seems the answer is yes, you can combine medtech with clinical medicine, and there are plenty of ways you can do that. So actually, sort of following on from that, someone asked, that, so I presume they're a medical student, and they clearly got to a point in their life where they're contemplating whether they really want to do medicine, or whether maybe medtech might be more their thing and working in industry. And they've asked, do you think it might be better to continue to the end of medical studies to qualify as a doctor and then maybe act on that consultant basis? Or do you think qualifying as a doctor gives you any advantage in recruitment?
Yeah. So if you're going into industry, you know, there are roles that I have recruited where, you know, a hard requirement is they must be a medical doctor. And so if you've already done it and you're kind of halfway in, I know it's a hard slog, but you know, it will give you an advantage. It depends on what type of roles you apply for ultimately, right? But there are roles that would specifically require you to be a medical doctor, you know, in order for you to be able to apply for that role. Those are the ones that are very, very highly paid, and those are the ones that you can typically leverage that clinical working knowledge into industry. So unless you're absolutely 100% certain you don't want to go back to it, I would always recommend that you see something like that out.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a very clear, useful answer. Just keeping an eye on time, because we're running into the last 10 or 15 minutes or so. So please do fire in your questions on the chat if you'd like us to ask them. We've covered a lot of the questions that were sent in advance, so do just let us know. I wonder if either of the other two have seen any questions that have come up.
Not on my side, but if anyone wants to ask a question live, you can also just use the raise hand feature, and you could just ask your question live as well on a more personal interaction. I think that would be nice too. Feel free to do that.
Yeah, so there is actually one question that's come in on the chat, which is asking about medtech jobs that can be done fully remotely, and what those kind of opportunities might be.
That's a really interesting one. So definitely the role that I spoke about earlier, which is what we call medical writing. This role, we've recruited people literally all over the world, you know, to do for companies, because it's more about, it's a single contributor role. It's about reading study reports and reading literature, and then being able to put together scientific text in order to demonstrate how that product might be safe, effective, and efficient. So something like that typically is a great remote role. Regulatory is a good one for being able to work remotely. Marketing probably as well. Clinical study managers. So we've recruited quite a few of those that are remote, but the actual people running the clinical trials themselves obviously have to be on site. But the people who are kind of running them as a program manager, those typically can also be done remotely. So yeah, there's quite a few, but not so much the ones in operations. So anything to do with like actually kind of manufacturing the products and quality testing it and then getting it out, they're not so remote.
I would actually just like to make sort of a tangent or tangible comment to that, and more actually picking up two points that came up in your previous answers. So one was in sort of getting experience and demonstrating that you care about medtech, and specifically about the medical writing one. So I guess that's more of a side comment, but at the national level, we are organizing a essay competition actually, is exactly for their purpose, for giving people sort of a first exposure with a small prize as well. It should be launched in the next month, so do keep an eye out for that. And I guess a little bit of self-advertisement in this regard as well. You will be informed about that if you sign up to become a member of the national network. So do check out the site again, which Jay, who's actually our national finance director, has posted in the link or in the chat box before. So very exciting. And I guess that's also why I think for us, not just at the personal level and as individuals, but also as the foundation. It's very interesting to interact with people like you, to give us ideas of what we could do to better support the student community. But I guess as a question again, and less about me mumbling, is I understood that one of the important things that people are looking for, especially when it comes to applying for your first job, is that you're able to demonstrate that you're interested and that you're well informed as well. So there was a question coming in on how do you keep up to date? How do you keep up to speed with the progress in such a in such a widespreading field as MedTech with so many different branches?
Yeah, absolutely. I think depending on I think you have to kind of just have a general sense of direction. So like, what is it within MedTech that speaks to you? So is it kind of the whole thing around digital health and AI? So if so, know what's going on there. Like just keep informed, follow, look at AdvaMed, look at MedTech Europe, look at MedTech Foundation, do a Google search. When you're applying for a company, at minimum, you need to know who they are. Have they been in the news recently? Like, what's special about them? What's different? What differentiates them against their competitors? And actually, like, what are they playing in and what is their product? You know, if it's a startup specifically, they're one product. But if it's a big corporate, like, what do they play in? Yeah. So like, is it predominantly cardio? Is it, you know, is this an orthopedic company? You know, try to understand that. You don't need to go into the really, really granular detail, but if there's been something disruptive or, you know, if a company has just had their product approved, that will be on their news, you know, that they would do a big press release about that. So if you're applying for a position at that company, make reference to that. So show that you're well informed, not just about the industry as a whole, but actually about them. So interviewing is like dating. I always say this to everybody. Interviewing is like dating. And literally imagine that you're sitting across the table with your interviewer. Imagine that's like you're sitting across the table with somebody who you're dating, right? And they say, why do you like me? If you're on a date, you're never going to say because you're female and you have brown hair, right? Like, it's too generic. You need to give something like tangible and specific about why that company or why that role. So you need to actually understand what is going on at that company that you're applying for, and then give like proper concrete answers that speak to you, that are not just like generic that you find on their website. And I promise you, that's going to make a major difference, because so many people don't do that when they apply for jobs. They just send out generic spam applications to as many people as they can, without actually going in and targeting. And instead of sending like 30 applications, send 10 really directed, really good ones where you've put a bit of time into making that application. And I guarantee you're going to get a much better result.
Yes, I guess I agree with that. Dan, I've seen your hand. I'm just going to make a random comment related to that, because I really like the analogy to dating. It happens that at the pre-dinner lecture that I went to yesterday was actually about the philosophy or the philosophical definition of flirting. And one interesting bit that came out of that, which I think is related to what you're saying as well, is that there has to be a mutuality, and both need to benefit. So I guess it's important that not only to demonstrate that you as an applicant are interested in the company, but also like why the company should be interested in you, or sort of what value you can bring that, or bring them.
Yeah. 100%. I've done on my LinkedIn profile, I do these little mini videos, like 2-minute videos, and I talk about this all the time, because when I do interview coaching with candidates, it's so often, you know, even with experienced candidates, when a company says, you know, why did you apply for this role? It's all about them. I want to get a promotion. I want to get a salary increase. I want to, you know, develop my career and learn something new. And all the company is hearing is has no experience, needs investment, is not solving my problem. So actually, if you when you apply, or when you're in an interview, talk about the value that you add. So, you know, I have these skills because I was on this program, and this is something really different that I want to leverage and, you know, bring to your company. Or, you know, I'm really willing to kind of like learn, and I already know this and this about what you guys are doing, and have you thought about this and this? And you know, this is something I'd love to bring to the table, and always talk about what you can bring, not what you want to take.
That's incredibly useful, practical advice, I have to say. Yeah, I guess it's a different question of actually putting that into practice, and I guess that needs practice as well. But I think Dan actually raised his hand earlier on. Do you want to ask a question yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a quick question about clusters of companies. So are there actually any locations where like a lot of medtech companies are clustering together, either in Europe or like globally? And if I'm interested in medtech, do you think I should really like focus and look at those clusters and see what's going on there?
Definitely. So what you tend to find is that you tend to get little clusters around universities, because typically that's where the innovation comes out, and then there's a startup and then it grows. So in the UK, kind of in the Cambridge Oxford triangle, there's a cluster there in particular. Obviously in London there's a cluster. If you look at some of the major markets that we operate in, so if we look at Germany, Munich, Frankfurt, Hamburg, Berlin, Switzerland, Zurich, Lausanne, France, Paris, Lyon. So I would look, you know, where typically around these universities, you know, in Norway, there's a cluster that they're typically everywhere. So yes, there are. I forgot what your second question was, Daniel. I'm sorry.
Just when I'm interested in medtech, do you think it makes sense to actually look at those places specifically and try to, you know, get in the community and those kind of things?
Yeah, especially if you go down the route of what we said. So instead of applying for a big corporate, look for a startup, because that's where you're going to get really valuable experience. The clusters, they're all networked, so they all kind of study together at uni, or they know someone, and it's all kind of referrals. You know, that's how they kind of get consultants to help them with their business, or business advisors, or, you know, their angel investors. They're all connected. So if you can get into those clusters and start having conversations with some of them and understand, you know, who are those players, and if they haven't got anything, who can they recommend you to? That's a great network to be part of and to get into. So I 100% would recommend that.
Yeah, and I guess I just to add to that, for everyone, also those who don't have that much of an eye on the chat, which is actually Will asked it answered in writing. Moritz and Samuel's question on like how to find an internship or a startup. I guess surely they're more interested in your answer, but I'm gonna do a tiny bit of self-advertisement before that. Just again, we're increasingly organizing internships, that is by connecting companies which are offering internships to our membership base at the national level, and you're informed about those if you are a member, which is of course free of charge, and you become a member simply by signing up, which might take you 3 minutes on the website that Will has kindly copied or reprinted in the chat. But I guess the question was actually more addressed to you, Elena, just like how, and I guess it was more specific also about startups typically not necessarily advertising internships, because I guess it's having an intern is also, at least initially, a lot of work from the side of the company, and I think that might be harder to accommodate in a smaller venture than in a bigger company. So how does one find out, or how does one find out which, especially startups, are offering internship opportunities?
So yeah. So first of all, obviously what you said with the offerings that you have with the internships and being able to connect people to companies, Elemed are going to be developing something along those lines as well at scale. So watch that space. We're not doing it right now though. And so the best way, I always feel, is direct approach. So what does that look like? It means going onto LinkedIn, having a look at some of the companies, you know, so if you can search by location, you can filter by industry, you can filter by company size, who are those companies and who are the CEOs of those companies. With startups, you always need to go straight to the CEO and send them a message. But the way you send the message needs to be really, really specific. So just sending a CV and saying, do you have any internships, is not, I don't think, going to get you a good response. But actually have clarity around what type of internship you'd be looking for, what sort of skills you bring to the table, and why, right? So like, for example, you know, this is what I'm studying, especially, you know, I did a module in, you know, neuro, and now you're applying to a neuro company. So you know, this is an area for me that really spoke to me in my studies. I'm looking to maybe build, you know, 3 months of experience, just to get a sense of what's going on. I'm particularly interested in supporting a company that's bringing their product to market. So through that, you know, development and commercialization life cycle. Do you see value in maybe having me come in and support you for a few months, like, you know, and try those very specific approaches, talking about specifically what type of roles, what type of areas you feel that you would want to get experience in. And if they don't know anyone, okay, who else could you recommend me to? Are there any networks that you recommend, or, you know, where I could find more people within this space, and kind of go like that, you know. That's what I would recommend.
Yeah, so I guess in a sense, coming back to your dating analogy, it's better to have quality of the application over just of sending out blank messages, very much. So with an eye on time, I think there is space for one more question, which is again one of a more personal note, if you allow,
Sure.
which is what you're most excited about developments in the current and future developments in sort of the medtech area.
I'm really interested to see what Elon Musk is going to do with Neuralink. Yeah. I think digital health really excites me, because, and what tech companies are going to do to the medtech industry in particular, right? So what we're seeing right now is a trend of big tech. They've disrupted every other industry, and now they're starting to truly disrupt the medical industry, you know. So Apple, Google, you know, what are they doing to this industry? And we've seen some really cool advancements. You know, we've seen companies like Babylon. That's one that, you know, I really love in the UK, and their partnership with the NHS, with GP at Hand, completely changed the way doctor's appointments are done. And they've got an AI that, you know, is able to do triage. And AI is going to be a big topic, you know, in medtech that I'm watching. And I really think that it's going to be an exciting space to be in the next few years, for sure.
I couldn't agree more. I think we should really, unfortunately, wrap up here. But I think we all, but surely I enjoyed this incredibly. Thank you very much, Elena. Has been very insightful. And I think I'm going to hand over to Dan again.
Yeah, thank you so much, Manuela. And thank you, Elena. I think this has been really interesting. I know the future of medtech is bright, so I would really recommend all of you, if you're still in your studies, I think most of us are, get involved in medtech in one way or another. It's very interesting and exciting what we see now and in the future. So thank you so much, Elena, for joining us. This has been very insightful. It's been really a pleasure having you here today and having you answering all those questions that we have. I think the medtech, careers in medtech are a bit more clearer for me, at least now. There's still lots of open questions, I'm sure. But I'm sure students can find ways to find out some more information, and it's a great start. I'd also like to say thank you to Manuela and Will for asking all the questions. It's been a really enjoyable fireside chat. It's been really nice to watch. Thank you so much. And to everyone who joined us today, thank you so much for joining. We will send you a follow-up email with a couple of links. We've mentioned a lot of different things, from Elena's podcast to the activities that we're running in Cambridge or all over the UK. We will send you a couple of links for that. And I'm sure you can find Elena on LinkedIn. She is quite active on LinkedIn, posting very interesting insights about medtech and careers in medtech. So make sure to follow her there as well. And also feel free to follow us on Facebook to find out more about our events and things that are happening in Cambridge and in the UK. I think with that being said, we're at the end of our webinar. Thank you so much for joining. And yeah, have a lovely Wednesday evening. And we hope to see you at our next MEDEX event or at the innovation program. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.